On the morning the assignment was given, the suns over Xera Station rose like two coins held between the fingers of a giant. Their light came slantwise through the atrium of the Xyloxy Academy of Interstellar Biology, lathing everything in a quiet gold. Alara trailed the stream of students past the fountaining gas ferns and into Lecture Hall V, where the ceiling shifted to simulate a clouded sky from a world few of them had ever seen. She chose a seat in the middle row, not so close to be conspicuous, not so far back that the professors would assume she wasn't trying. Round her, her peers shed their morning stillness like husks. A cluster of quarry bubbled and clicked to each other, their voice modulators translating a beat later into gossipy whispers. Xerithians, all quiet brightness and sharp corners, unfolded their jointed limbs carefully so they wouldn't nick the seats. 3 Vextrian broodlings in heat-resistant cloaks slumped in a pile of elbows and shins, exuding the smoky tang of igneous breath. Alara caught herself grinning. She used to catalog them in her head, as if that were the only way to make sense of being the lone human in a hall full of otherness. Species, order, class, genus, family, traits, preferred climate, typical food, known sensitivities. The wall behind the lectern rippled and became a translucent tank, a theatrically unnecessary flourish that meant Professor Glur was about to arrive. Sure enough, a heartbeat later, the water bulb doors exhaled. The professor slithered in on muscular fins, all 6 eyes a tranquil green, their throat sac inflated politely. "Good morning, organisms," Glar sang, and his sim translator rendered it sonorous and dry. "Let us consider, as always, the premise upon which this academy rests. Knowledge is a kind of proximity. One can memorize the teeth of a thing and still not know its bite." A few of the first years shifted. The bite lecture, the old one about proximal epistemology, about the ethics of closeness to dangerous life. Alara had heard versions of it her whole life, first on Terra in bone-white classrooms, later during transport orientation, and then again, constantly, as cautionary prefaces to almost everything on station. But Professor Glar's version was never stale. Perhaps it was the pulsed pauses he left in the talk, like sonar pings echoing before the next idea slid into view. And so, he continued, "We will conduct our midterm exercise in practical predatrology. You will each of you bring a predator to class tomorrow." The translation muffled the word predator, but the original syllables struck the water in his tank like a weight. The class reacted as if someone had opened a hatch. A gust of chatter surged through the hall. Parameters. Glar raised 2 of his 6 hands. Not apex only. Predators relative to their local ecologies. Wild caught is permitted, but not required. You will demonstrate basic handling, feeding response mitigation, and control cues appropriate to the species. No stasis collars unless your species requires them for safety. And no neuroinhibitors. This is a biology academy, not a butcher's stall. You may source your specimen from the controlled biomes in Dome 3. Those wishing to import must file your species selection by midday and meet all quarantine and anti-vector protocols. Questions? Dozen hands and forelimbs rose. The professor chose a Xerithian Arset, Alara thought, whose mandibles trembled in a constant vibration that indicated stress. "What constitutes control?" Arset asked. "If a restraining field prevents a bite but not a lunge, is that control?" Glar said. "Is not merely immobilization. Show a relationship that modulates behavior through signals, tools, or structures. The predator should respond in some way to you. If a field does all your work, you have not learned. You have delegated." A quarry in the front row twitched a fin. "We are aquatic. The terrestrial biomes will desiccate us before we can pair with a partner species or acquire a pressure bath rig from the lab supply." Collaboration encouraged. The professor's eyes drifted, settled. "Yes, human." Alara lowered her hand. "Are there restrictions on size?" "Size is not itself a hazard," said Glar, which was, in Alara's experience, something typically said by beings who had never been chased by a boar. "Choose a scale you can understand. The goal is not spectacle." He paused, a smile rippling through his gills. "Though, as always, spectacle is the enemy of boredom." Nervous laughter trickled around the hall. Alara rolled a stylus along her knuckles and kept her face blank. Her pulse was up, but not from fear. From the shape of the challenge, bring a predator, control it, show a relationship. She ought to be offended by the assumption that humans would excel at this. She'd heard the death world jokes, the quieted voices. They drink poison water, they breathe oxidizer. Their infants crawl near open flame, but the truth was she did feel the tug of something ancestral, a recognition that ran down the nerves like a remembered song. Teeth and eyes in the brush, heat and heart. Professor Glar dimmed the tank to a somber blue. There's one more requirement, he said. Whatever you bring, you must be able to let it go. If it cannot ethically be released, do not take it. We will leave no permanent dents in Dome 3. The class seemed to deflate. Even the Vextrians, who usually preferred their ethics, like they preferred their meals charred and minimal, nodded. Glar concluded with the formal closing, fins pressed together. Knowledge is proximity. Proximity is care. Alara's friends waylaid her in the corridor, a flurry of limbs and accents. You are not actually considering this, are you? Kesh asked. Kesh was quarry, small and quick, her skin a shifting map of blues that signaled worry. You're in the same class, Alara said, flashing a smile. We're all considering it. Yes, but some of us will bring, say, a sedated glider fly or a darkling worm in a tube. Kesh flapped her gill vents. You'll go roaming into Dome 3 with a bag of snacks and come back missing 3 fingers. And an ear, too, said Hriv, a Vextrian broodling who had once gnawed through a titanium brace for fun. His cloak was patched with glasscloth and old scorch marks. Humans balance symmetry, Alara snorted. I'm honored by your faith. She left them near the lab supply queue, promising to meet later for lunch. As she walked the ring corridor that circled Xera's teaching domes, she let her steps slow. Through a viewport she could see Dome 3's canopy, a quilt of simulated biomes. Under a mesh of climate regulators, blinking like stars, the dome could do desert or tundra, gas marsh or wet forest. And the station's ecological staff had arranged a dozen patches into an approximation of a living world. Predators existed in almost all of them. Predation was not an identity so much as a role a creature played between dawn and dusk. She meant to think practically, to list candidates and risks. But memory did its old trick of arriving first. Alara was 5 the first time she followed her mother into a preserve on Terra's northern continent. It had been winter, a poor season for ease. Their breath rose white. Their boots made that pleasing squeak that snow makes when the air is colder than your teeth. Her mother had a rifle across her back and a laugh that cut through the wind like a bright knife. They tracked, but not to kill. Her mother worked relocation and rehab, coaxing predatory cats back from the edges of roads and farms, teaching them that the world did not end at a fence. On the second day, they found a young lynx crouched under a blown-down tree, one leg tangled in an old wire snare. The cat's eyes were a molten yellow, the pupils thin with pain. Alara had not moved. Her mother had talked to her quietly while she cut the wire. The cat had not struck. Later, when the bleeding stopped and the pain blear faded, the lynx had lifted its head and looked full at Alara, calm, unafraid, as if it would remember her in the next world. She blinked, and Xera's fluorescent afternoon soaked back into view. She was not 5. There were no wire snares in Dome 3, but the same steady part of her that had not moved in the snow was present now, attending Dot in the refectory. She took a tray to a corner where the noise didn't bounce so hard and sketched a plan on her slate. Constraints must be ethically releasable into Dome 3 after demonstration, must be responsive to cues within 24 hours or at least not unreleasably habituated, must be demonstrably predatory in the local dome ecology, must be within her strength to restrain if something went wrong, must not trigger 3 pages of safety waivers she couldn't process by morning. Candidates flickered in her notes. Scythe Weasel to social, would bond to quickly, risk long-term imprint. Glass Viper aquatic ambush specialist, risky for a bite without pressure gear. Microbasilisk terrible idea. Why did the dome even have those? Tree stalker even worse. She drew a line under the list and wrote, medium pursuit predator. Juvenile preferable, no venom. Preference for carrion or mixed diet to reduce handling risk. Kesh plopped into the seat across from her like a tossed fish. News, she announced. Arsit says the professor has his eyes on anyone who uses a field as a leash. Also, rumor says the lava lizard in the geothermal microzone is egg-heavy and will not be amused. Alara swallowed. I wasn't going to bring a lava lizard. Good, Kesh said fervently. Don't, I enjoy you with your limbs attached. What are you thinking? Something from the temperate patch, Alara said. She rotated the slate to show Kesh her notes. There's a line of scrub near the eastern ridge, in the transition band before the marsh. Small ungulates, burrowers, ground nesters. Plenty of prey. Something predatory hunts there. Something, Kesh repeated, unimpressed. You will go and find something. Sometimes proximity is discovery, Alara said. Parroting glar are not quite on purpose. I'll take meat and a kit. I'm not collecting a specimen. I'm asking one to come with me. Kesh's skin went navy at the edges, the quarry equivalent of exasperated fondness. Your species is a problem, universally agreed, Alara said, and stood. I'm going to the gear locker. The locker attendants had eyes like scales on a pinnacone. They watched her sign out a standard handler's set with a single laser lancet for emergencies, a coil of microline, a field kit that could patch anything from a torn glove to a bitten artery, a foil blanket, a scent masker, a roll of meat sticks, and a pair of soft jesses suitable for paws, wrists, or wing ankles. She added a battered jacket from the communal borrow bin thicker than she liked, but the dome's night cycle could bite Dot at the entrance to Dome 3. The safety officer took one look at her and opened his mouth to give the usual speech. Alara recited it with himstay visible on the beacon grid. No solo excursions into restricted patches. Don't chase into dead-air gullies. If you lose sight, stop and announce. If you are bitten, lean with the bite instead of pulling away, because that tear's worse. The officer sighed. I don't like that one, he muttered, stamping her wristband. Feels defeatist. It's how you keep your hand, Alara said. I like keeping my hand. The dome's air met her like a face pressed against a palm, warm, damp, a little sour with soil. The sky plate showed a low, unalarming gray. Someone had set the weather to late afternoon in any temperate belt. She walked through the gate into a lightwood of tough-limbed trees with leaves like small fans. The path dwindled to a suggestion. The dome liked you better if you stopped insisting on being on a path. Alara breathed, slow and deep, to let her body switch registers. Vigilance wasn't a tense thing. If she let it be, she'd miss the soft cues. The brush near her knee quivered with something small making a choice. Overhead, a flock of tiny glass wings flickered in and out of the leaves, every wing beat a click. A minute later, she found the scrape, soil turned up into distinct porakes, scent overlaid with ammonia and musk. A territorial mark. She crouched to look. Not fresh, a day old, but near it, a more recent scuff, a tumble of leaf litter and a dark, granular smear. She touched it, then smelled her fingertip. Blood, old enough to have lost its iron edge. Something had eaten here and moved on. She followed in a lazy curve, letting her attention settle in the corners of things. She paused when the trees thinned. Ahead, the scrub rose toward the ridge. The light shifted, a revelation of broken stone, a slouch of shadow. A long view toward the marsh where a green haze lay over the water like breath on glass. If she were a medium pursuit predator with a taste for small flesh, she would hunt where the burrows braided under the scrub. If the burrowers were smart, their runs would exit under heavy root masses and deadfalls. If she wanted to meet the hunter, she had only to become part of the landscape it understood. She opened the meat sticks and tore one lengthwise to release more scent. She didn't scatter pieces. She wasn't baiting, she was conversing. She tucked slivers into the undersides of roots, into the pockets where rock met soil, into the little tunnels a careful paw could reach. Then she sat on a fallen trunk and pretended the rest of the world did not exist. The trick was patience that wasn't brittle. The dome light softened toward evening. A wind machine far above her head changed its rhythm, and the trees answered with a sibilant rush. The glass wings had hushed. A ribbon snake uncoiled from a branch, tasted the air with a tongue like split moonlight, and slipped away. Alara kept her breathing slow, her gaze on a middle distance, her hands loose on her knees. The first sound wasn't a sound, not exactly. It was the absence of a certain pressure, the silence that rode in front of a cautious body. Then there, a soft huff, a footstep whose weight had learned to lie. She did not turn her head. She moved her eyes only and saw a shadow slip from shadow. They were smaller than she expected. And that surprised her, though, of course, in a place like this, where apex niches were limited by dome design and policy. Juveniles would roam at the edges of adult ranges, 2 of them, rangy-shouldered, with thick coats that broke up their silhouettes, 4 eyes each in a diamond pattern, good depth perception, and wide-field vigilance besides. Ears cupped forward like scoops, pink skin thin enough for veins to show in the light. The front paws were too big for their bodies. The lesson of carnivores everywhere. They would grow into them. Cubs, she thought, and felt her plans tilt. If there were cubs, there was a mother, or there had been. She looked for signs she was already inside a bigger shadow. None. The cubs were alone. Their smell sharp with stress and overexcitement. They were thin. Their movement had the frantic edges of hunger taught to fear. When the slivers of meat's scent reached them, they froze, lifted their heads in that manner all predators share. The world narrowing to a single column of smell. Alara didn't move. She didn't coo or hiss or call. She let the meat be a word, and let the cubs decide what it said. The bolder one approached first, shoulders rolling with that toddler confidence that any surface will hold you. Because the last one did. It found the sliver under the root, pawed it, flinched at its own suddenness, then snatched the meat and backed into brush to eat. The second cub circled wider, suspicious, and took longer to gather courage. When it did, it took a sliver and flicked a glance at Alara, so brief it might have been imagined. She tore another stick and tucked new pieces nearer her boots. The bolder cub ate, then came back, driven by that old equation of hunger and habit. It sniffed the ground, found a piece, flicked its gaze up at her again, and held it a fraction longer. The second cub kept its distance. Alara didn't take offense. Fear had kept more creatures alive than bravery ever had. As the light gentled toward dome night, Alara shifted minutely, enough for her joints to stop complaining, not enough to translate as threat. The bolder cub's ears pricked. Its lower set of eyes, the side eyes, remained on her even as the upper pair returned to the root. It was a remarkable design, those 4 eyes, the ability to fix and survey at once. She felt watched by 2 animals, not one. After the 4th trip to the meat slivers, Alara eased a hand into her jacket pocket and brought out one of the soft jesses. Not a leash, not really. More a loop to give a brief point of touch. She laid it on the log beside her knee. Then, under the breath quiet, she spoke for the first time. Not words the cubs would know, obviously. Words for her own body as much as for them, to keep her exhale smooth, her pulse from jumping. "You're fine," she said. "I'm not a trap." The bolder cub came close enough for Alara to see the tiny spines along its muzzle. Sensory whiskers evolved to taste the air's electric skin. Mud streaked the fur under its jaw. One of its hind paws had a raw patch, likely from a stone or thorn. It put its nose to her knee and inhaled the gentlest little vacuum, like the first sip of a drink. Alara did not reach. She did not reach. After a long, taut moment, the cub turned its head and presented the back of its neck, as if the planet had taught it a ritual for an introduction, and it wanted to try it. "Okay," Alara said very softly, to the dome, to herself. "Okay." She slipped her fingers under the jess, lifted it, and, moving as if the air were thick honey, looped it over the cub's neck and tightened it just enough to feel. The cub spasmed and froze. The other cub hissed, a high, hot sound that made her scalp tighten. Alara kept her hand on the loop but did not yank. "Pressure," she murmured. "Just pressure." The bolder cub heaved in one breath, too, then let out a body-sized sigh and relaxed the way animals do when they decide to grant a truce. The second cub watched the whole exchange with a scholar's intensity. When Alara dropped the end of the jess and sat back, it crept closer, touched noses with its sibling, and then reluctantly, as if conceding that victory sometimes tasted like imitation meat, took the last sliver. From the butt of Alara's boot, night in the dome arrived as a lowering of contrast. The wind machines cooled. Somewhere to her left, the marsh sang with a single resonant frog. Alara eased off the log and onto her feet. The cubs tensed, then bunched, then astonishingly did not flee. The bolder one stepped into the space where her leg had been, sniffed at the ground, and then, without drama, bumped its shoulder against her shin. The second cub flicked its ears back and forth so fast they blurred, then mimicked the gesture. Touching, not asking. "I have to go," Alara said. "There's a fence between our worlds. I can't sleep here, but I'll come back." She considered leaving then, letting the connection thin and snap on its own. Instead, impulse no, not impulse, a stupid, joyous hunch carried her a step further. She crouched, slid her hands under the boulder cub's forelegs, and lifted. It weighed less than she'd have thought from its paws. Hunger had narrowed its rib cage. It made a surprised, indignant sound and then, heroically, decided to pretend she had not done anything improper. She hoisted it up and set it gently across her shoulders, its body draping along her collarbones like a living stole. It flexed, considered clawing, thought better of it, and instead arranged itself with the practical narcissism of a creature who has discovered a higher vantage point. The second cub stared. Alara lifted her eyebrows at it. Well, it took a half step back and then, with the air of a being who refuses to let a sibling have all the baffling new things, jumped. She caught it clumsily, laughed aloud when it scrabbled, and settled it on her other shoulder. Its breath came hot against her ear. Its heart thudded almost in time with hers. She straightened, very slowly. The world acquired an extra sense, each micro-movement translated through the cubs, balance into tiny shifts. She imagined the look on Professor Glur's face and had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from grinning like an idiot. Home, she told them, even though that wasn't what she meant. For now, they went with her through the wood, along the barely path, back toward the gate. Twice she paused to let them down to drink from a seep or investigate an interesting smell, then lifted them again when they returned to bump her knees. At the fence, she knelt and scratched the boulder cub between its shoulder blades, where the first swirled like a weather map. The cub leaned into the touch and made a sound like a kettle thinking about boiling. "I'll be back at first light," Alara said. "Food again. A game, if you want. No traps." They watched her with those for eyes, upper pair on her face, lower pair on her hands. She slipped the jess from the boulder one's neck and bunched it in her palm. The cub blinked and bumped its forehead against her wrist, as if exchanging a token. The gate's sensor read the wristband and unsealed. The dome's air kissed her goodbye as she stepped through. She looked back once. The cubs had melted into the brush. She felt their absence like a chair suddenly empty dot in the corridor, under station air the scrubbed. Bright smell of it. Alara stood for a breath and let her shoulders remember they were her own. Then she walked, jacket torn, hair tangled, palms smelling of musk and old leaves, toward the dormitory wing. Her slate chimed, a message from Kesh, "If you are eaten, I get your plant lights." Alara snorted and texted back a picture of her shoulder, for still clinging to the fabric like static. "If I am eaten," she wrote, "come rescue the cubs." She slept in a tangle of dreams that smelled of winter and blood and wet earth. When her alarm chimed in the blue before station morning, she was already awake, eyes open to a ceiling that looked nothing like any sky she had ever known. She swung her feet to the floor and tied her boots in quick, confident knots. "Bring a predator," the professor had said. Alara smiled, small and private, and went to find breakfast for 3. The eastern airlock of Dome 3 groaned as it sealed behind Alara, leaving her in the hush of manufactured wilderness. The difference was immediate and absolute. On the station ring, air smelled like nothing, perfectly filtered sterility, stripped of character. Here, though, the dome pressed sense against her skin, wet loam, resin from split bark, the tang of living water, and beneath it all, the subtle musk of fur and scale. Dome 3 was a masterpiece, not just a teaching environment but a living argument that predator-prey dynamics could be simulated, studied, and respected all at once. 25 kilometers across, it contained biomes stitched together like a patchwork quilt, temperate forests, tundra margins, volcanic ridges, shallow marshes, even a manufactured desert wedge at the far southern quadrant, each zone blended into the next so that no single creature had a perfect refuge. That was the point. Predators must move, learn, adapt. Students, too. Alara paused at the ridge trail where the dome's topography began to rise in tiers, each step a subtle invitation into deeper country. A locator beacon in her wristband pulsed a quiet rhythm against her. VEINS station protocol. But beyond that, the only sounds were natural: wind shivering through the fan-leaved trees, water dripping into pools, the distant cough of something unseen. She adjusted her pack straps and muttered, "All right, let's see what's hungry." Signs in the brush moved carefully, but not silently. True predators already knew she was here. Quiet feet were for prey. Instead, she set a steady, unhurried pace, head turning in arcs that let her peripheral vision pick up more than her eyes could. Her boots pressed deep into soil littered with roots and fallen pods. Each step carried the faint creak of leather a human sound in an alien would. An hour passed before she found the first evidence: a spray of feathers scattered beneath a broken branch. The feathers were black with a pearlescent sheen, the kind of plumage that flashed bright to attract mates, but their tips were bloodied. She knelt, touching one, still supple, killed within a day. A few meters on, she found tracks, four-toed impressions with claw marks angled forward. Each print was larger than her palm, pressed deep into the soil. The stride was short, unsteady, not an adult predator in its prime, but something lighter, younger. Cubs. Alara's lips curved, though not with triumph. Cubs meant vulnerability. Cubs meant risk. A mother defending her young could be deadlier than anything else in this dome. She brushed dirt from her knees and stood. "Patience," she murmured, as if the dome itself were listening. The waiting Gamesh chose a low rise, near the edge of the scrubland, where rock outcroppings jutted from the earth like crooked teeth. The slope overlooked a series of burrows pockmarking the soil, the kind made by quick-footed prey animals, perfect hunting ground. From her pack she pulled strips of dried meat, strong-smelling, oily, made to survive weeks in vacuum. Tearing them into small lengths, she placed them strategically, near a root hollow, at the mouth of a burrow, half hidden under a stone. Not bait, exactly, more like an invitation. And then she sat, cross-legged, spine straight, jacket wrapped close against the dome's manufactured chill. She waited. The dome cycled slowly toward evening. Wind towers shifted their rhythm, cooling the air. Overhead, the light panels dimmed to amber, casting the forest in a burnished glow. Alara breathed evenly, letting her senses loosen, her ears catching rustles, her nose sorting the air for musk and iron. Minutes stretched, an hour, maybe more. She thought of her mother again, the way she used to crouch in snowfields, rifle slung and eyes half closed, telling Alara that waiting was the truest form of strength. A predator's patience. Her mother used to say, "Learn it, and you'll always see before you're seen." The first encounter silence broke with the faintest shuffle, not the skitter of prey, but the heavier scrape of something placing weight carefully. Alara's eyes flicked toward the sound without moving her head. Two shapes slipped from the underbrush. They were smaller than she expected, shoulder high to her waist, with stocky builds and thick coats that glistened faintly in the dimming light. Each had 4 eyes, the upper pair forward-facing for precision, the lower pair angled outward for vigilance. Their muzzles were short but powerful, lined with crystalline fangs that caught the amber glow. Their movements were hesitant, youthful. Cubs. They froze when they scented the meat. One gave a low growl, a sound too big for its throat. The other tilted its head, ears twitching, nostrils flaring. Alara kept perfectly still, her breath slowed. She didn't reach, didn't speak. The bolder cub padded forward, claws clicking faintly on stone. It sniffed the meat near the root hollow, swiped it with a paw, then retreated a few steps to chew. The second cub lingered behind, glancing from Alara to its sibling, torn between caution and hunger. The ritual repeated: step, sniff, retreat. Step, sniff, retreat, each time. The cubs ventured closer, confidence blooming as they realized the food wasn't a trap. At last, the bolder cub approached the piece nearest Alara's boot. Its eyes upper and lower fixed on her, testing, weighing. It crouched, snatched the meat, and for one heart-stopping moment, didn't retreat. Instead, it sniffed again, this time at her boot. Alara's pulse thudded in her ears. Slowly, she tilted her head down, meeting its gaze. "Hello," she whispered, voice steady as stone. The cub froze. Then, astonishingly, it huffed a warm breath across her ankle and withdrew, not in fear, but in recognition. The Bonby, the time dome night fell. Both cubs had eaten their fill of the scattered meat. Their growls softened into low purrs, a rumbling vibration that resonated in her chest. When Alara finally shifted to stand, the bolder cub startled, then bumped its shoulder against her leg, a gesture that felt almost companionable. The second followed, brushing past her knee with cautious dignity. She crouched again, lowering her hands slowly, palms open. The cubs sniffed her fingers, their crystalline teeth glinting inches from her skin. She didn't flinch, and when one leaned just enough to brush its muzzle against her knuckles, she felt the spark of something deeper than chance. Not dominance, not taming, trust. "Looks like we understand each other," she murmured. She knew then what she would bring back to the academy. Not a caged predator, snarling behind fields and chains, but these two wild, untamed, and willing to walk beside her. She stood tall, adjusted her pack, and began the trek back toward the dome's gate. When one cub pressed close to her side and the other padded after, she didn't look back. They had chosen. The following morning dawned in calculated brilliance. Xera Station's day cycle brightened from deep cobalt to pale gold, flooding Lecture Hall V with simulated sunlight. Students filed in, some with trembling limbs beneath their formal garb, others with forced bravado. The assignment had not been theoretical after all. The hall now resembled less a classroom than a menagerie, each predator accompanied by the smell of ozone from containment fields, the scrape of chains, or the hissing of portable stasis collars. Alara paused at the door before stepping inside. The weight across her shoulders was warm and alive. Two cubs, still heavy with sleep, draped themselves along her collarbones. Their purrs resonated faintly against her spine, a sound so primal it vibrated into her bones. She tugged her jacket closed just enough to keep their paws from snagging on the frame, and walked forward. Menagerie of Firth. First creature she passed was Arsit's choice, a hunter insect from the Zirithian desert. It writhed against the transparent field, mandibles clacking like knives on glass. Its eyes tracked every movement with alien precision. Arsit stood stiff as sculpture, his carapace trembling, mandibles twitching. A quarry student had brought a water snake, housed in a floating pressure tank. The serpent coiled languidly, its iridescent body shining like wet oil. Occasionally, it struck the barrier with a sound that echoed like a hammer underwater. The quarry kept murmuring through their breathing mask, perhaps to reassure themselves more than the serpent. The Vextrian broodlings, predictably, had outdone themselves. One of them dragged in a lava lizard from the geothermal patch. Its belly glowed with molten heat, each breath venting smoke. The broodling wore a cloak charred around the edges, proud of the danger. As if daring it to burn through, each predator looked dangerous. Each was controlled by chains, fields, or cages. Each radiated menace, caged but not defeated. Then the door hissed open again, and Alara entered. The humans' displayer classmates' voices faltered into silence. She didn't drag a cage or project a containment field. She didn't carry a sedated beast, nor a writhing insect. She carried nothing but herself and the two cubs. One sat perched on her left shoulder, tail wrapped lightly around her neck. The other lounged across her right like a great feline scarf. Jaws parted in a lazy yawn that revealed crystalline fangs. Both purred. Alara walked as if she owned the space. Not arrogantly, not strutting, simply with the unbothered steadiness of someone who trusted the predators at her sides. Murmurs began, low at first, then rising. "Are those tame?" whispered a quarry. "They're cubs," hissed another. She brought pets, but none could ignore the way their own predators reacted. The hunter insect thrashed harder in its field, clattering mandibles in agitation. The lava lizard withdrew its molten tongue and coiled tighter, uneasy despite its heat. Even the water snake slowed its strikes, coiling in silence. Predators recognized predators, and they recognized something else: the bond. Professor Glur's skepticism. Professor Glur rose from the depths of his tank, all six eyes narrowing. His voice, translated into the room's speakers, was measured but edged. "Human, you were instructed to bring a predator. What you have carried into my hall are domestic kits." Alara smiled faintly. "They're not domestic, Professor. They're wild. I met them last night in the dome." The cub on her right shoulder punctuated the claim with a low hiss, jaws gaping in warning. Its sibling mirrored the sound, their duet a rolling thunder that made the very air vibrate. The nearest containment field crackled as if recoiling. Professor Glar hesitated. They appear bonded to you. That is not the same as bringing a predator. Alara adjusted her stance, letting one cub leap down to the floor. It padded forward on heavy paws, claws clicking against the smooth tiles. It sniffed the air, then emitted a growl that silenced even the Vextrian broodlings. The other cub stayed on her shoulder, eyes unblinking, surveying the class as though it were their territory. They're predators, Alara said softly. Efficient hunters, territorial, teeth and claws for tearing. But predators don't just kill, they choose. They weigh risk against reward. They decide what to trust. She stroked the cub on her shoulder, whose eyes softened but whose fangs still gleamed. And last night, they chose me. The class shock rippled through the room. The Xerithians buzzed nervously, mandibles tapping. The quarry released a flurry of bubbles through their masks. Even the Vextrians, so proud of their lava lizard, looked unsettled. Their molten pet suddenly less impressive in the face of creatures that obeyed without chains. One brave voice spoke up. That isn't control. That's what? Friendship. Alara's gaze swept the room. Control is fear. What I have isn't fear. It's trust. And that's far stronger than any stasis collar. The cub on the floor padded back to her, brushing against her leg before climbing lightly up her side to perch across her shoulders again. Their twin purrs rumbled like distant engines. The hall fell utterly still. Even Professor Glar, master of patience, let silence linger far longer than usual. Then, finally, his voice returned, subdued but tinged with something new: curiosity. Very well. Human, we shall see. His gills flared, signaling the beginning of the next stage. Tomorrow, the predators will enter the arena. There, your bond or your fear will decide your grade. A chill swept through the students. Arena day was infamous. Cages would open, containment fields would drop. Only real control or trust would matter. Alara stroked one cub's head. Its eyes flared with reflected light. We'll be ready, she whispered. And though her classmates tried to dismiss her calm, none of them could shake the truth that pressed down like weight in their lungs. The human hadn't tamed predators. She had become part of their pack. The arena was older than the academy itself, carved into the heart of Dome 3. It stretched like a scar across the landscape, an open circle of stone, ridged with natural-looking terraces, its floor patched with scrub, rock piles, and artificial prey targets. The dome's sky panels shimmered dimly above, set to the pale steel light of dawn. Students filled the upper terraces, predators secured within cages, fields, or tanks at their sides. Anxious murmurs rolled across the seating, muffled by the heavy press of expectation. Today was not about theory. Today was about proximity and whether it could hold when teeth met flesh. Professor Glar swam lazy circles in his portable water tank, elevated so he could oversee all. His gills pulsed, each exhale bubbling faintly against the glass. 6 eyes swept the gathering, solemn. The trial begins. Each predator will be released. Each student will demonstrate the relationship they claim to have built. Knowledge is not cages. Knowledge is not distance. Knowledge is proximity. The last word reverberated through the translator, low and final. Like a gavel, failures in blood and fear. Arset the Xerithian was first. His hunter insect screeched as the containment field dropped. It darted across the sand, mandibles snapping, claws gouging furrows. Arset raised a field prod, clicking commands in his species' signal tongue. For a moment, the insect obeyed, lashing dummies apart with violent precision. Then it turned. The prod sputtered. Arset stumbled backward. Only an emergency shield dropped from the rafters stopped the insect from latching onto his throat. Gas flooded the arena. The beast collapsed, twitching, its body hauled away limp. Arset sagged, defeated. The class whispered, too much fear, too little bond. The quarry followed. Their sleek water snake released into a shallow pool at the arena's edge. It slithered through the water with elegance, striking each simulated prey in a blur of speed. Applause rose until flames ignited along the far wall, part of the test sequence. The serpent shrieked, thrashing against the water as though already burning. It bolted, slamming itself into the tank's barrier until attendants dragged it out. The quarry student wept quietly, mask fogged with breath. The Vextrian broodlings entered last before Alara. Their lava lizard roared as it hit the sand, fire bleeding from its throat. It crushed obstacles, ripped apart decoys, filled the arena with smoke. But by the end of its run, its steps faltered. Heat radiated off it in waves too fierce even for its handlers. Its body sagged, exhaustion overtaking it. Pride had chosen a predator too volatile to sustain. The broodlings scowled, but said nothing. 3 failures, 3 lessons. And then all eyes turned to the human. The human's turn. Alara stepped forward, shoulders squared, the cubs at her side. They were larger already from the meal she had given them that morning, coats glinting in the dim light. They padded into the arena without hesitation, as though it were merely new terrain to claim. Gasps rippled across the terraces. No fields, no chains, no collars. Professor Glar's voice deepened. Human Alara, demonstrate. Alara crouched, pressing her hand briefly to the sand. Both cubs paused, eyes on her. She whistled, low and steady, a sound they had learned in the night. Then she pointed. The cubs moved like liquid. They darted toward the nearest prey dummy, circling with uncanny coordination. One feinted left, driving the target into the other's pounce. Their crystalline fangs sank into synthetic flesh, tearing it apart with brutal precision. The class gasped again. The cubs did not lose control. They did not turn on their handler. They returned. One brushed against Alara's leg, purring, jaws dripping with foam. The other leapt onto a rock, surveying the arena with a predator's confidence before bounding back to her side. She stroked their heads, calm as still water. Good work. The test of scouts. Professor Glar flicked his gills. The real exam had only begun. Obstacles shifted. New decoys launched. A mechanical predator shaped like a massive steel wolf sprang into the arena, teeth buzzing with energy blades. It was designed to test control, to simulate threat. The cubs stiffened, ears flattening. A growl rolled from their throats. For a moment, the bond could have broken. Fear could have scattered them. Alara stepped forward, placing herself between them and the steel wolf. Her heart hammered. Easy, she whispered, voice low but firm. With me. She didn't shout. She didn't brandish a weapon. She extended her hand, steady as stone, then gave a sharp gesture. The cubs responded instantly. They split apart, circling the machine, snarling. One drew its attention, darting just out of reach. The other pounced from behind, claws raking at its joints. The wolf staggered. The first cub leapt, teeth crunching against steel. Together, they dragged it down, sparks flying. When it collapsed, twitching and lifeless, the cubs didn't frenzy. They stepped back, sides heaving, then returned to Alara, pressing against her legs. The arena thundered with murmurs. The verdict. Professor Glar watched in silence for a long moment. His 6 eyes blinked slowly, one after another. Finally, he spoke. You do not leash predators. You do not frighten them into stillness. You bond. His gills flared in emphasis. This is unprecedented. Alara met his gaze calmly. On Earth, we survived because predators trusted us. Dogs, cats, horses, falcons. The bond kept us alive. I didn't invent this. I just remembered it. The cubs purred at her sides, as though agreeing. The professor tilted his head. And you, human, what do you gain from their trust? Alara smiled faintly. The reminder that I'm not the only predator here. A shiver went through the class. For the first time, they realized the danger wasn't only in the cubs' teeth or claws. It was in the human who had walked among predators and walked out with their loyalty, trust, sharper than any fang. And far more dangerous.